We'll give everybody a few more minutes to get in. Beth, our guest speaker, called me. She's having some computer issues, so she's racing to her office to get on the work computer so she can present from there. So we'll all be holding our breath, hoping that she doesn't get into an accident rushing over there. Hey, Chen, do you see who's unmuted? I'm hearing something coming through, but I don't see anyone who's unmuted.
Hold on, let me check. I'll see if I can scan the list.
Oh, I see a couple of people here.
You mean including me just now? Because I had to unmute myself?
No comment. So I see our guest speaker is here. Beth, hi. Glad you could make it. And we'll give everybody a few more minutes. We typically will start about 3 minutes after 7. We want to, of course, we appreciate that you're here and we respect your time. So we don't want to keep you any longer than we need to, which means that we do want to start on time. For those of you who have friends or colleagues who might be joining us a little bit late, we are recording this onto YouTube. It is being live streamed, and that live stream will stay up on YouTube until we get it edited, and then we'll swap out with the edited version sometime in the future. There was a question early on, and as people come in, they can't see the previous chat, but there was a question asking how many of the participants have children or relatives with autism, ID/DD, or special needs. So if you want to post in the chat, there are several people who do have family members or children, and we do welcome you. I will ask after the presentation that you give us some input, because I think I could be mistaken, but I think that everyone's experience being a parent with an autistic child is going to be different, especially when it comes to people who are not used to interacting with autistic children, especially under stressful situations. What warnings or what suggestions can you give us in those circumstances so that we don't repeat the mistakes that you've seen happen with your own family members?
Are you asking for suggestions now, or this is going to be?
After the presentation.
Okay, got it.
Also, we have, I believe I see, yes, Carolyn Burleson, who was the former Central Bureau Coordinator for the Community Emergency Response Team in LA City. She works a lot with other seniors and people with disabilities, and I've asked her to give maybe a 10 to 15-minute presentation after the main presentation to talk about those members of our society and community as well, because for those of us who are not interacting with them on a day-to-day basis, again, stressful situations, especially during an emergency, we need to know how to interact and what to expect that reaction to be. Something that comes to mind is, well, we're burning a couple more minutes for people to come in. One of our former coordinators mentioned that she's been evacuated a few times during wildfire season, and she would check on her immediate neighbors. The first time they evacuated, the next door after she stopped checking, there was an elderly couple that lived there who did not evacuate. Either they didn't know to, or it was too stressful. They didn't understand the need to. It was just too much for them. She found this out after the fact. So she came the next time they were evacuated, she checked in on them and made sure they were the first people she checked in on, and helped them get to their car, made sure they knew that they were going. And then unfortunately found out after the fact that they didn't fully evacuate. They drove down and then for some reason turned around and came back. So we know that there are vulnerable members in our community who will react differently, either out of confusion, out of it's too much stress, out of just for a variety of different reasons. Maybe they just don't feel safe leaving their home, and they don't do what we expect them to do. So we need to even if there's nothing we can do about it, at least understand and hopefully help our neighbors out. All right, we're up to 88. Beth, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thank you. Can you guys, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. So, hi, thank you for inviting me to this training. My name is Beth Wyatt. I'm a supervising park ranger in Sonoma County for Sonoma County Regional Parks. I've been working in first responder disaster services, park rangering in general for about 15 years now. And I also have two children on the spectrum, one pretty severe and one higher functioning. And I'll kind of talk about those definitions and what I mean by those terms as we get into the presentation. So I developed this presentation as a first responder and a parent to kind of bridge both worlds, because I have had experiences in disasters, in emergency rooms, in different emergency situations where people didn't know how to interact with people with autism. And I have also been on the other side of that. I've responded to emergencies and treated people, interacted with people who have varying disabilities, autism being one of them. So I wanted to develop this presentation for two reasons. One, to make my children safer in the community and let my fellow first responders be a little more aware of what's out there so that they can be safer in their jobs. So that's the reason behind this presentation. I've done it for about the past 5 years or so. I really enjoy teaching different groups. I notice in the chat that there's a lot of folks here either who have someone they love with autism, they themselves may be on the spectrum, or have varying differences from what I'm going to refer to as typically developing people or quote unquote normal people. So as we launch into this, one thing I want to say and recognize is that my experience is going to be with my children. So it doesn't span the entire autism spectrum. I have one child on each end of the spectrum. So I have really a good understanding of a couple different ways that autism presents, but that does not encompass everything. So while I'm pretty much an expert in my children, that doesn't mean I'm an expert in all of autism. So I welcome other people's experiences and comments, and I'll be pausing during this presentation to give you a chance to either voice a concern, voice another opinion or a different perspective, or give us, if you're a responder and you've had some interactions with folks that are on the spectrum, or you thought afterwards that that might be the case, please share that as well. Patrick, did you want me to go ahead and start sharing my screen and launch into the presentation?
Well, just one second. I would like to thank everybody for attending tonight. This presentation is up on our YouTube channel. If you search for LAFD CERT, you'll find it as LAFD CERT coordinators. There you can find all of our other trainings. We do this monthly, every third Wednesday of the month. We have topics that range from beginner topics to intermediate to advanced topics. We have guest speakers who come on that we invite with topics that we think will be of interest to everybody. This channel is not just for those members of our community who are community emergency response team trained. This is for anyone. This channel, these presentations, you don't even need to live in LA City. So we appreciate that you're here, that you're attending, that you're interested in this subject, and we hope that you learn something and then you encourage your neighbors to get better prepared as well. We're up to 100 participants tonight. So Beth, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Patrick, if you could let me know if someone has a very specific question in the chat while I'm doing my presentation, that'd be helpful. I see a lot of folks chiming in on Asperger's, so we'll talk about that. I cover that in my presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen here and launch into my presentation. Give me just 1 second. There we go. So hopefully you can all see that okay. So welcome to Autism Recognition and Response. And as I said before, I developed this both for first responders and so that my own children can be safe during emergencies when they need to be assisted by someone else. So a little bit about my training and experience. I mentioned some of this in my introduction. If some of you came in late, I do work as a supervising park ranger for Sonoma County Regional Parks for the last 15 years. So that job really includes law enforcement, providing service at the EMT level, search and rescue response. And as of 2017, if you're all aware of what happened up north, that was the start of our really big fires here. So that was the Tubbs fire. That was the biggest fire at the time until I think it was eclipsed by the Paradise fire the next year. So we lost our status, which is sad because that was a big fire. And it's unfortunate that we're seeing more of these. But so now my job includes a little bit of fire response training and evacuation. So I also mentioned that I have 2 children diagnosed with autism. One is 12, one is 14. So we're right in the middle of puberty, which has been an adventure for me. And I have my master's in emergency services administration. I thought I'd really like to put some of my knowledge to the test, see what I could develop. And with that, I have developed a guide for folks evacuating their family members with autism. So it's a guide for parents and caregivers of autistic dependents, and it talks about disaster preparedness. So if that's something you're interested in, I'll provide my email at the end and you can let me know. And that's something I can easily email to you, as I see there are a lot of folks with family members on the spectrum. So that might be of interest. So what are our objectives today? We're going to loosely define autism. As I said, I'm not an expert in autism. I'm an expert in my children's autism. And I've done a lot of study as part of my master's degree on autism, on the impacts of autism, and how autism really impacts people during emergency events. So with that said, I might not cover everything. Some of you out there might be listening, and I might not cover some very specific things that you have sensitivities on. This is kind of a general training for people who are unaware of autism. So by no means am I trying to offend or leave anyone out. We're just going to talk about some real general common traits of autism, what people have in common, what to look for, and understand why that has a direct impact on their safety, especially during an emergency, especially during an unexpected event. And I'm going to talk about a few tactics and techniques that have worked for me. I've seen them work for other first responders in the field that will increase our effectiveness. So if you are a CERT member, I saw in the chat that someone is a nurse. If you are someone that deals with people and has the pleasure of helping them through an unexpected event, such as an emergency, a disaster, then I'm going to talk about tips to really help people with autism in that situation be a little more at ease with your presence. To me, if someone doesn't know everything, but they know a little bit, that puts me at ease as a parent that says you're trying. And I think that's really important. That being said, I apologize ahead of time if anything I say offends anybody. All of this comes from a 100% love of my children, but are they incredibly difficult to raise? Yes, they have been. I have failed many times as a parent, and I'm okay with that because with each time we learn, we move on, and everything I've done for them has come out of the need to and the desire to better serve them as their parents. So that said, please feel free to ask the awkward question. If you don't know how to talk to somebody, if you don't know how to ask the question, if you don't know if it's someone with autism or an autistic person, let's just ask that question. Maybe someone in listening and tuned in has a better answer than I do. What I always say and what I believe is if it's coming from a place of generally wanting to know how to improve your language, how to educate yourself, and it's coming with good intentions, there's no offense being taken here. So as long as everyone is on the same page about that, I think we can just really openly talk about autism. And again, I'll share some stories about my kids because I think it really helps drive home a lot of points and understand that I love them dearly. But yes, they have been difficult. And yes, we do laugh about some situations now that didn't seem so funny in the time. So like I said, we had the 2017 fires here. So I do have experience evacuating 2 kids with autism. I think we're up to 4 fires now that we've had to evacuate based on where we live. So I have some experience with that, with the emergency side. And we've been frequent flyers in the emergency room. So some experience with that as a parent. So why do we need to know about this? Why is this important to educate first responders and people out in the community about responding to folks with autism in these emergency situations? Like I said, there's unique characteristics of autism that really impact safety during these unexpected events. Here are some examples. Few of these, one of them with tragic, well, all of them are tragic really, but we see an example of police shooting a 13-year-old boy after his mom had called for help. I'm not here to Monday morning quarterback anybody to say what should have been done, what could have been done. If anyone's listening and they are a first responder with an agency or you do participate in the CERT, nothing I say here is intended to trump your own training and your own policies that are in place for your safety, right? Because your safety comes first. When I teach this to officers, to firefighters, it doesn't trump their existing policies. This is just more information for you, more information for your toolbox. So when we say he's a small child, he was shot by the police, there's a lot to that story. And I'm just throwing these examples up because if you see at the bottom, 1 of every 5 young adults on the spectrum will have an interaction with law enforcement before the age of 21. So that's pretty high compared to our typically developing population. So cause for concern, which is why I throw these up here. Drowning is also a very common incident with lost children with autism. There is a draw to water and bodies of water. And tragically, there's not a lot of knowledge of how to swim. So that is also something that happens fairly often on the spectrum. The Fremont fire example, this woman was an incredible mom, an incredible advocate for autism who changed some of the laws in California requiring health insurance to cover services for people with autism. But with fires, with these disasters, sometimes, as Patrick mentioned in the beginning, the elderly couple that was trying to evacuate for some reason became confused, went back. A lot of times in fires, children with autism, people with autism will hide because they don't know what's going on. If you think about what happens during a fire, there's a lot of sensory input involved with that. So is there a fire alarm? Is there unfamiliar smells? And a lot of that can be overwhelming to people with autism. So they can go back and further hide and tragically perish in fires. So this is why I like to teach people about autism, because it is very specific to safety and safety awareness. So with that, we're not only talking about, fire safety, police safety, search and rescue safety, but in the greater context of disasters, which we're facing more of now. So I find this training to be more relevant now more than ever.
Beth, before you go on, you're showing the presenter view. It wasn't a problem, except your live caption and subtitles tab is blocking some of the frame. So let's see if we can get you out of this.
Okay.
Do you see the big screen on your side, or do you see two little screens?
I see the little screen with everybody on it, all the participants, and I see the big screen in the middle.
Okay,
And
does it
then
say
I
display settings
have-
at the top?
Yeah,
Show
let me get
taskbar,
there.
display settings, and slideshow.
Yes.
Try hitting display settings.
Okay. There we go. Is that better?
Much better, thank you.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Woohoo! You're the bomb.
All right, guys. So sorry about that. Here, I'll go back and you can see the last couple slides. Okay, so let's get to autism by the numbers. So when I started this 5 years ago, the numbers was, they were at 1 and 68 children. 1 in every 68 children were diagnosed with being on the spectrum. One thing that I specifically do not talk about in this slideshow are the causes of autism. That's very controversial, and that's not where my area of study is. I will say that there is a strong connection, a strong genetic connection for autism that they've found pretty consistently. So what does that mean for us as responders? It means you could be helping a child, a dependent with autism, and there could be more family members impacted. So just something to be aware of. Not to say that every parent of the child also has autism. There's many of us parents that are pretty normal in the grand scheme of things, but just something to be aware of that can impact more than just one person in the family. So if you're thinking you're contacting one person with autism, just think that there is that family connection, and there could be more people that you're going to be coming in contact with. So boys more likely than girls. I have one of each, one boy and one girl. So I get both sides of it. And you see that intellectual disability is 30%. To me, that's pretty low. That means that you're going to run across plenty of folks with autism and on the spectrum who are going to be typically developing, who are going to fully understand what you're saying, and they're just going to have some different reactions. We have 40% at nonverbal. Nonverbal, to me, there's also a spectrum of what nonverbal means. So does nonverbal mean that someone doesn't make any utterances or have any language, and specifically depends on a device or some kind of visual to interact? Or does it mean that there's a little bit of language? I call my daughter nonverbal, so she's 12, and she has utterances. If someone strange to her were watching her in my house for a few minutes, she could probably direct them to what she needed to eat, drink, and tell them a few things about what she wanted, what TV show she wanted to put on. So she probably has the language of about a 3-year-old, but I'm going to call that nonverbal if I'm dealing with someone or trying to talk to someone in the first responder sense, because I think it's easier than telling them what kind of language she has. So something to keep in mind as you're trying to communicate with folks, that some might not communicate at all. And that's something to keep in mind with. And that's very common with autism. And nearly half of those of autism will wander or bolt from safety. My daughter does both. She wanders and bolts from safety. So I get a little bit of action there, and it's a concern. So one thing we're going to talk about, and I'm going to bring up, is how that sensory piece can impact people with autism and how that can lead to a bolt or a wander from a safe environment. So this is about all we're going to define on autism today. Like I said, I'm not a doctor. I'm not an expert in autism specifically. I do know quite a bit about autism. So when we talk about autism as a spectrum disorder, you'll see up there autistic disorder, pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified. I don't know if anyone uses that term. It was going out of fashion about 15 years ago when my son was, about the time he was born. And then Asperger's syndrome. They're all now called autism spectrum disorder. Some people still use Asperger's. It's a very common term. I had the pleasure of seeing Dr. Temple Grandin, a very famous woman with autism, present, and she referred to Asperger's. She referred to herself as having Asperger's. So it's something you'll see. A previous generation was defined as being high functioning. They were called Asperger's. That syndrome was Asperger's syndrome and not specifically autism, but they're finding so many nuances to autism now that it's all just autism spectrum disorder. So although it will affect everyone a little bit differently, it'll have varying severities based on the person. So while my daughter has a lot of repetitive behaviors and a lot of sensitivity to change and stimulation and communication difficulties, my son has almost no repetitive behaviors. That's not part of his realm, his autism. He has the social impediments. He has some sensitivities to change and stimulation, and definitely a different kind of communication difficulties. So when you see up there communication difficulties, what does that mean? As we talked about, some people are going to be totally nonverbal, and that's going to be a communication difficulty for them. Others have difficulties with that social piece, and that's a communication difficulty and a social impediment. So they are very self-aware, very self-thinking, and this can manifest in different ways. With my son, he has a really hard time of understanding what someone else is feeling, the position that someone else might be in, and that someone else might not share the same interests. So if someone on the spectrum is panicked, is scared, they might assume everyone else is scared and panicked like them. Everyone else is feeling the same thing. Everyone else is just as terrified by that fire alarm as they are. So they might not understand someone else's role in a disaster versus their role in a disaster and versus how they are feeling at the time. So that's one of the hallmarks of autism. Again, we'll talk a lot about this sensitivity to change and stimulation as a part of this slideshow. It doesn't mean that that trumps everything else with autism, but it's one of the things we can try to control. And it's one of those pieces that we can be aware of and maybe do some mitigation in to help people get through the disaster, the emergency, whatever we're facing at the time. Along with being aware of those communication difficulties and what that means and how we communicate with someone. Understand that there are motor difficulties that go along with autism. This can be fine motor, this can be gross motor. Someone could have a hard time picking up and holding objects. So if you're going to tell someone, hey, grab your shoes and run out of here, the building's on fire, we need to evacuate, that task might be very hard. In fact, the task itself physically might be hard, and then giving a two-part direction might be really hard. So we'll talk about some of these things and what you can do to make it a little bit easier. You're not going to be able to mitigate everything in the environment going on, but we can mitigate quite a few things. So what are the safety concerns with communication? So I talked a little bit about that lack of ability to comprehend the social norms. And what I mean by that is there are certain situations, certain, I call them novel situations, a situation that doesn't come up all the time. And a person with autism might not understand what their expected role in that social situation is. So one tool that's very effective for my kids and that has been very helpful and are pretty commonly used are what we call social stories. So a story that tells a child, tells a person with autism how to behave, what to expect in any given situation so that they can learn that, because it's not an innate thing for them necessarily. With being on the spectrum, there can be that, like I talked about, that lack of ability to understand what someone else is feeling, what someone else's part is, and what their part is in relation to that, and what is accepted behavior and what is unaccepted behavior. Those are kind of terms that I use. So if something happens and it's out of the ordinary, I can say, oh, that's an unexpected behavior to my daughter. And she kind of understands that talk because it's pretty common with ABA therapy that goes along with autism, pretty common with her school. And that's something that we use. I talked about my son and him not understanding what other people are interested in, what other people are talking about. So topic selection, taking turns in a conversation, maintaining that conversation can be quite difficult for someone on the spectrum. So while we're trying to get information as responders, as community helpers, we might not be getting anywhere with someone on the spectrum. There might be a lot of one-sided conversation, one-sided topics. So how do you break that? How do you be aware of what that means? And if you're out there and you run across someone who's just talking about, is pretty fixated on one topic and can't move past that, then we can stop and think, is this, am I dealing with someone with a difference, with any kind of intellectual disability, with autism, with some of the other things that are out there that might be like autism. I met a few people with Tourette's, and some of their behaviors can be very similar with someone with autism. So when you see this focused topic selection, that is one of the hallmarks of autism. And the nonverbal communication can be hard as well. So those nuances that we all understand as typically developing folk might be really hard for someone to pick up on. So we're going to have to be very specific about what we're doing, what our intentions are, and not rely so much on our body language, right? Where a typically developing crowd, a typically developing person could really pick up on that, can pick up on the urgency. Someone with autism, we're going to have to slow it down, and we're going to have to really explain our actions, explain what we're doing. A very common one is the inability to maintain eye contact. Sometimes it can be just too much sensory wise to look someone in the eye. That's very intense, and that can give them too much visual feedback. So it could be hard to maintain that focus on someone and maintain a conversation, which can explain sometimes the difficulty in the eye contact. We talked about kind of repetitive topics or scripts. So my daughter will often repeat scripts from movies. That's kind of her thing, right? And my son did that a lot when he was younger too. So as we're trying to talk to someone, if we're just hearing the same things, hearing something that sounds like they've repeated it a lot, then that might be that we're not quite getting through to them, or we don't have a clear path to communication with them because they are using that repetitive script, that speech delay. And processing delays is, so that's another piece that's pretty specific to autism, is processing the information that came in. So I kind of talked a little bit about slowing things down, taking them step by step. If you say to someone on the spectrum in an emergency, hey, grab your shoes, we need to go, it's an emergency. That's a lot of things that we just said at once, right? There's the shoe bit, there's the emergency, there's we have to go. So even though we are often, if we're trained CERT providers, if we're working in another kind of emergency services realm, then it can be very hard for us to slow that down. But the more we can break something down into steps, If it's something that people are unfamiliar with, then the more success we're going to have with them. So again, like I said, this doesn't trump any pre-existing protocols that are in place for safety. If you have to go, you have to go, and you're going to have to do your best. But when we have the time, if we can, slow it down, really get through that processing piece and really piece it out. One thing that I use that's very helpful for my children, and I've used as a responder before, is first and then, letting someone know that first we're going to do this, then we're going to do this, and just being very clear about what those steps are. First, we're going to grab a pair of shoes, then we're going to go out of the house, then we're going to get into this unfamiliar vehicle because we need to evacuate now. There is a fire coming, there's this coming, and this is what we expect to happen after that. So if that makes sense, it's one thing to help with the processing delays. Does anyone have any questions or comments before I move on? We're going to talk a little more about communication and the processing delay. So, but if anyone had anything to add or chime in with, like I said, I'm not an expert on everybody's manifestation of autism, but I would like to hear from anyone out there if they have something to share. Patrick, I don't know how you want to kind of do that.
If anybody has any questions or wants to bring up something, they can go ahead and raise their hand, and then I can call on them. We have a couple hands raised already. All right. We have Isaac.
Hey, how's it going? I have kind of like more comments. So I've been an EMT for about 5 years, and I think a certain member for around the same amount of time. And just two things that come to mind is when you're doing like a mental status check, there's several versions. And can you hear me okay? I just want to make sure. Okay. There's several versions, but like say for instance, if anyone's familiar with like the Glasgow Coma Scale, or if you're not, that's okay. But basically, anytime, say as a first responder, not necessarily a parent, if you're checking the mental status of a person during like a disaster or medical emergency, it's really important, if you're able, and sometimes you're not, to know what that person is usually like. Like it's very different if, say, an autistic person responds to you in a certain way that they always respond, than if someone that's not autistic responds in a similar way about being nonverbal and certain physical reactions. So if there's any family or anybody nearby that I think could know that person's usual kind of behavior, that's important in like a disaster situation. And my second thing I kind of had in mind was that, and this is easier for family, of course, but some people in a disaster situation, I feel like you could talk down, and some people you can't. And there's no like real way to know. You kind of just have to trust your gut. And it's kind of like the sooner you figure it out, the better. Because I've had situations dealing with certain patients where I've literally tried to talk them down for hours, and I thought that was the best move at the time. And there's others where, like, within 45 seconds, you're just like, this person cannot be talked down in any way. And this, you have to take other steps to make sure everyone's safe. So those are kind of my thoughts, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Isaac. On those 2 points, yes, we're going to talk about what a meltdown looks like for someone on the spectrum, and what can cause that, and what we can do to kind of mitigate it. But you're right, sometimes you're going to ride out the storm. And yeah, a family member or someone close to them, a caretaker. Last time I did this presentation, someone mentioned the one-on-one aides that often work with folks on the spectrum, ABA aides. And absolutely, one thing I like to ask people, if they're not forthcoming with, my son, daughter, mom, dad, sister has autism, because it's hard for people. It's a hard thing to share, and people are at different stages of accepting it. So what I like to ask is this behavior typical for them? And like Isaac's talking about, is this typical? Is this how they normally present when we're trying to get a baseline or a feel for, is there another injury that we need to know about?
How many more questions do you want to answer before we move on, Beth?
2 more would be fine.
Okay, Crystal.
Hi. Thank you for having this, first of all. I did arrive a couple minutes late, so I'm just wondering, will there be a question and answer period at the end of your presentation as well, or are you just taking questions along the way?
There will be one as well. I just know there's a lot of folks with some experience that might want to chime in as we go. So I just wanted to give an opportunity for that, but absolutely a chance for questions and answers. And then I will provide my email at the end for anyone who has additional questions or wants to talk further.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Oh, this is a good one that Michelle posted in the chat. When asking questions, my daughter might answer yes to most questions that she doesn't understand, since it's important to know the answers may not be accurate at all. We see this not just with autistic people. We see this with people in general. I always tell our coordinators at CERT booths, that outreach booths, that if you ask somebody, have you heard about CERT? They're going to say yes, and they're going to keep walking because they don't want to acknowledge that they don't know what that means. So I always tell our coordinators to spell out, have you heard about the Community Emergency Response Team? Because that's self-explanatory, versus you say an acronym like CERT, they think that they should know what this means and they'll just answer yes and then try and get away from you.
No, that's a really great comment. And yes, echolalia is something that happens with autism. And sometimes it doesn't even have to be that diagnosed or that specific, but yeah, there is a tendency for some folks to just repeat the last word that they hear. So are you hurt? Yes or no? No, because I just heard, the no was the last thing I heard, and I'm going to repeat that. So I like to ask questions in a different way, or ask something that I know that they are aware of. If you have a caretaker or with my daughter, I ask what I call a compliance question. So, do you like Skittles and would you like some? She better answer yes. If she's answering no, I know that something's up. So if you have a caretaker with you, if you have someone who knows that person, it's a really great way. Like what will they answer? What should they know? Because yes, if my daughter went to the doctor by herself, who knows what she would be diagnosed with, because she would say yes to everything. Everything hurts her right now, or nothing hurts her, depending on how you're asking the question. So that's a really great comment to make. So I'll move on. If anyone had a question that we didn't get to, like I said, at the end, we will have some question and answer periods. So we're going to talk a little bit about that communication. We talked a little bit about that, that tendency to answer the last thing said or repeat the last thing said. So I like to use very simple language when we're talking about a disaster, an emergency, evacuate, really breaking it down. What do we need this person to understand? And how can we put this in very clear language? Like I said, I use a lot of first and then. First, we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this. It's really important to know that someone with autism might have their own idea already. So if you say something like, oh, there's a fire. Well, at school, when there's a fire drill, I run outside, I wait, and then I'm allowed to go back into my house. Well, during an evacuation, right, during a fire, the expectation might be, we're going to leave the house. We're not going to come back to the house for some time. It's not safe. And that's hard to comprehend, especially if you can't see the fire yet. So that's a really hard concept to try to get across to someone with autism. So it's important to try to understand and try to kind of fish out what their expectation is. And if you can't do that, explaining step by step what's going to happen. I'll use one of my very favorite examples because it involves, I'm sorry guys, but the Giants, because I'm up here, so I'm a Giants fan. Let's see how many people just log off instantly here, but take my son to a Giants game. And at Giants Stadium, if you sit in the bleachers, you can't see the big screen. And my son's pretty functioning, pretty high functional, pretty intelligent, communicates with us, loves baseball. I go with my parents. We go to sit in the bleachers and he just breaks out in tears and I can't figure it out. And then he starts freaking out because he can't see the screen because we're sitting right next to the big screen. His expectation of a ball game was to be able to see the big screen. It would be as if I took any typically developing child to Disneyland and all the rides were out of commission. That's not their expectation of what happens at Disneyland. So this was not my son's expectation of what was going to happen at a ball game. So he's already doing something that's a little out of the ordinary. And that's where we can start seeing some behaviors with people with autism. Routine is very important. So when you break that routine, you're getting into an area where there's going to be a lot of controls, a lot of mitigations in place to try to get through that circumstance. So we're already in a different situation because we're at a ball game and that's pretty special and he's excited. So his emotional stability is a little off. And then he sits somewhere where he can't see the big screen. So luckily for us, there were some seats available to upgrade. So for hundreds of dollars more, I was able to get him seats to see the screen because in his mind, a baseball game was seeing the screen. There was no difference between the two. So really be careful when you're explaining things or asking questions that there might be a preconceived notion of what is expected to happen. So the more we can break that down and speak clearly, be very clear about what is going to happen, then the better. And allow plenty of time for the response. We're going to see a short video clip about processing delays. This woman, Deborah Lipsky, has agreed to have her video shared for the purpose of education. So she has agreed to be interviewed for this purpose to really help people understand what the processing delay means to her. So she's going to talk about avoiding giving too much information at once. We talked about the example with the shoes. If you're going to be asked to grab your shoes on the way out, or asked to do something quickly, like too much information can really be harmful for someone on the spectrum. So we just want to be very mindful of that. And then again, there is that fixation on a topic and a narrow set of interests. So if that's what we're dealing with, we really, really, really want to try to break through that and get our information across because we're talking to someone, again, in an emergency situation or in a disaster situation. So I'm going to share this video with you all. We're not going to watch the whole thing, just some of it. And hopefully I'm going to make sure that we've got the volume appropriate. So let me know if you guys can't hear it or if there's anything wrong on your end, but here we go. Oh my goodness. I'm so sorry, guys.
No audio.
Oh, you're kidding me.
When you share, you need to click the check mark that says share audio.
Okay.
Then you're going to have to
Thank
de-share and then
you.
reshare again.
You want me to stop share and then share again?
Yeah, that's the only way to share the audio. And the check mark should be on the bottom left.
Yeah, I got the check mark. Okay.
Only unitask. Do one thing at a time, answer one question at a time.
You guys
so
got that
questions
okay?
such as, license and registration,
Good.
and they want at the same time. It's difficult for us to do two things at once, or being badgered with questions trying to become more clear, but making it exactly the opposite. What are you doing here? It's late at night. You're making two different statements that need two different answers, as opposed to giving, and we need time to put an answer together because what's happening is we've been taken by surprise. Whenever we find ourselves stopped by, law enforcement, that throws us. And we're beginning to escalate already because we don't like the novelty of being stopped. So we're beginning to try to calm ourselves down, and what we're trying to do is because we're very impulsive and we splurt things out, we're trying to control what we're saying and moderate every word, and we're taking our time to process it slow and give you the answer that you want. But if we're pressured, like, come on, hurry up, what's going on, we can't. It becomes too much of a problem for us, and we begin the actual escalation process. So the delay piece is actually us trying to calm ourselves down a little bit, trying to keep ourselves regulated, and sometimes we'll talk out loud trying to formulate an answer, which again may come across totally different as cooking up an answer, or that we might have a mental illness to begin. But being asked more than one question at a time, or multiple adjuncts to one question, is too much for us to handle. We can only process one thing at a time. The problem that people forget with autistic individuals, we're very detail orientated. So when you ask an open-ended question, that's even harder for us, because we can go on and on and on and ramble and ramble. The most easiest way to handle questions is always add a yes and no and make the question concrete, as opposed to just trying to leave it open-ended. For instance, I always say, instead of saying, do you want a drink of water, which is very open-ended and doesn't have a concrete time frame, you would say something like, would you like a drink of water right now, yes or no? That closes it right there to a yes or no answer. It makes it simpler for them, less processing time, because it's very difficult for us to understand. Did you have anything to eat today? To an autistic person, that is too broad of a concept to even answer, because that is, we live in a very small time box. We have everything's regulated in our little brains. Everything's scripted. And if you say, what did you have to eat today? That is too much to comprehend. You should have to, qualify that by saying, did you have breakfast this morning? Yes or no? And the same thing with the law enforcement. You can just translate that, instead of saying, have you been drinking and driving? That is a question that's going to be impossible for them to even understand what you're asking. Drinking what? And they might ask, drinking what? Water? Drinking alcohol? And that may come across as, being disrespectful when they're just asking for clarification.
We'll stop it there. It's a really great video. She goes on, but I really think that's a great piece to illustrate what's going on with the processing piece. So one thing I love is the glass of water, because previously, before watching that, I thought asking someone, do you want a glass of water? I felt like that was pretty concrete, but you see how she says, listen, that's not even concrete enough. We have, do you want a glass of water? Well, when? Like now or in the future? It's that, do you want a glass of water? Yes or no? And then we also talked about some folks will just answer yes or no, or whatever the last question is. So is there an easy answer to any of this? No, that's why there's this training. If autism was easy, if they gave me a pamphlet when I was a new parent with two autistic children, fantastic, here's what to expect. But it is that spectrum. So we will run into folks with all kinds of varying differences on the spectrum and different communication styles. I really love that she talks about the fact that they're in a law enforcement situation to begin with. So that's going to lead into our next piece, which is that sensory piece. So this is where someone can get really overwhelmed and lead to bolting, lead to wandering, lead to some very unexpected behaviors that we're going to have to deal with, is that overload, that sensory overload. So when she talks about being stopped by the police, like she's already escalated. So one example I love to share with folks on the sensitivity piece is with, again, my son. So again, highly functioning, not someone who has a lot of public meltdowns or, issues kind of navigating the world. So he's probably around 10 years old, old enough to get a shot without being held down by mom. So, but that in and of itself, getting a shot, that sets him up a little bit for the day, right? So it's different than what his routine is. So already he's getting a little edgy. And I talked to him about what's going to happen at the doctor's office, because now we're out of the routine. He's been pulled out of school, so things are different. So he's a little elevated. And now we have to get a shot. So that elevates him just a little bit more. So already I'm dealing with someone who's taken a lot of steps to try to get himself into the car, into the doctor's office, and to cooperate. So that's taking a lot out of him. So I've tipped the scales a little bit. And I have him pretty calm. We are in the exam room. We're ready to go. I've talked to him. I said, Bennett, are you going to be okay? We're going to get a shot. Yep. I can handle this. Okay. Yep. I'll be brave. I'm good. And when the nurse comes in, she must have just had lunch and she smells like bacon. Like the whole room smells like bacon. And he just erupts and says, "Oh my God, what is that smell?" Right. And she's just like totally taken aback, like, well, I just ate lunch. And to him, it's the most offensive thing in the world because of that piece, right? He's already done so much just to get himself here that he can't handle now the extra sensitivity to smell. And that sets him over. And what do I do as a mom in that moment? Do I have the time, patience, and wherewithal really to sit there and say, oh, he has autism, this is what we've been through? No, I hold him down and we just get the shot because I know that that's going to be the end of it. We're going to walk out of there and it's going to be okay. So it's not a fire evacuation. It's not an extreme emergency. For him, it is at the time, but that's how quickly a sensory issue can set someone over when they've already tipped their scales, right? We're talking about the literal straw that broke the camel's back, that broke him down, that made him unable to deal with what was coming next. So this can be anything. And what looks like a kid erupted just because a nurse smelled of bacon wasn't really all that, right? So there were so many things that led up to that. There was the break in routine. There was the expectation of getting a shot, which is unpleasant. So when that woman talks about we're already in a situation where we're elevated, that's what we're walking into as first responders, as community members, as anyone going into these situations, is we're already behind the curve because someone with autism is already triggered, is already out of their normal. We're already dealing with an extraordinary situation for them, something that's out of routine. And routine is where these folks can really thrive and do better when they know what's expected. Like my son at the baseball game, when he knows what's expected, he can be successful. When he doesn't know what's expected, we're tipping the scales. So this can come in any form, these sensory sensitivities. We're talking touch, sound, light, taste, smell, temperature change even. And to us, we can deal with these. We can deal with an unpleasant smell because we know it's going to pass, or touch, or these little, nuances to life. But to someone on the spectrum, when I had the pleasure of watching Temple Grandin speak, she was bothered by the feeling of her pants. So just the fact that she had pants on that were uncomfortable, that was setting her off. The last time I did this training for search and rescue, someone brought up a really great point, and they said, when we find a victim or someone that we're searching for, we immediately put one of those blankets on them, one of those emergency blankets. And he said, would that be hard for someone on the spectrum? And I'm thinking, yeah, it's shiny, it's crinkly, it's not comfortable. So how much difference would that make in someone's life if you had a blanket that was actually pleasant to touch that you put on someone? Because I may have just found that missing child that bolted from safety, and I finally got them, calmed down and talking to me. And now I put this blanket on them, and now they're, I've just set them over the edge. I might have made them more unsafe by doing that, by adding that piece. So I think sensory sensitivities, although not, more important than everything else, but something that we can be aware of as first responders, as community members, as CERT members, when we're responding to situations. I'm going to share a little video with
Beth,
you.
real fast. Someone in the chat mentioned that he said it was traumatic. I was held down for my first shot, and to this day, I can't do shots. And I think that traumatic is you're describing your child's shot.
As I'm describing the shots, I don't mean to diminish anyone's experience. Definitely my daughter was held down by a dentist, and we've gone through many, many steps to try to mitigate that and get back to the dentist. So apologies, of course. For him, it wasn't, the shot itself wasn't, traumatic. He was able to go back. And again, when I'm talking about these experiences and talking about experiences, they are my very personal experiences, right? So I don't want to diminish anyone else's experience because, that's a really real feeling. to now be afraid of the shots or to have that negative association with an event. Absolutely. Okay, so here's a little video. Hopefully our sound is working.
Six, seven, 8, 9. Take my hand. No, Alex. It's fine, isn't it? It's fine. I'm not naughty. I'm autistic. And I just get too much information.
So that dance you see that boy do with his mom, I've done many times with my daughter, and it was pretty manageable when she was little. She now outweighs me and is 2 inches taller than me, so our dance looks a little different now, and that's why I like to show this video, because it looks like a mom just having a hard time with a kid with a tantrum. But there's a big difference between a tantrum and a complete meltdown. And we'll talk about that. And then if you envision that not everyone on the spectrum, of course, is a manageable 10-year-old child, there are some very real adults that are going to have some very real reactions to their sensory environment and you're not going to be able to do that dance. As it was, my daughter at the age of 3 had butted me so hard I almost passed out. So there's some really real power there and some things to be aware of for everybody's safety, for responder safety, and for the person that we are responding to. So what can we do to help mitigate this? I love to share this story because I'm not someone with specific sensory concerns or triggers. But I'm a responder. And during COVID, this must have been the summer of COVID when I literally had not touched another person who lived outside my house in months, right? Including hugging my parents or anything. So it's a long time to go without just even a high five, a handshake, a hug from a coworker. And I came across an accident, a pretty bad accident where the young man's car that overturned, he had been pulled out of the car while I was pulling up. And I end up, with this young man, and a deputy came up and he's helping me and we're talking, and, there's noise on the highway and the fire department shows up. All love and respect for the fire department, of course, but I'm holding C-spine and I look up and it seems like an endless wave of firefighters coming out of this vehicle, right? So there must be 20 of them packed in there. And by 20, I mean, there's probably 5, right? So all of a sudden I go from touching one person's head to now there's a firefighter at my back, and his hands at my back. So I know that he's there. There's someone on my side cramming in to secure this gentleman's head. There's someone else at his feet. And all of a sudden there's a lot of movement. There's a lot of touch, and I'm having a hard time focusing because it had been a long time since I had even just hugged one person, let alone now I'm being touched and touching a total of 6 people at one time. And that's a lot. So when I talk about what we can do to kind of mitigate our presence, think about how you show up, how your CERT teams work, how you work as a first responder, how you work in an emergency room. In where I work, the fire department, there's one person talking to the patient. There's another person plugging in probes and taking some blood pressure and, doing all these little bits. There's another person with the radio. There's another person maybe bringing in more equipment. Maybe they're rolling in, maybe the ambulance is on scene now and they're rolling in gurney. So think about a medical or responding an emergency in the context of that mall scene. There's a lot going on. So what can we do to help that? So we have these meltdowns can be caused by a number of triggers, commonly that sensory overload that we talked about. So are we responding to someone just to put them in further distress by our response? That change in routine. So if emergency responders show up on scene, if community members are out, looking and participating in a disaster, we already can assume that there has been a significant change in routine. And what is that frustration or fear? We talked about kind of the fear associated with doctors' offices or not knowing what to do, or, when I do a fire drill at school, it ends this way. And now I'm confused because now you're telling me something else and now I'm afraid. So this is where a meltdown can be very dangerous. And what is our role as a responder, as someone who's coming into the scene? I believe that most of you all in the CERT program are civilians, and some of you tuning in, we have an EMT, we have a nurse, actually do go hands-on with folks as part of their job. So this is going to be different from everyone, but you're seeing safety, right? Because our safety is always number one. And then the safety of the person that we're responding to. So in that situation, that mom in the mall with the child, I would help make a perimeter, help keep a containment field, whether that means kind of blocking the exits to make sure the child doesn't go in there, make sure that we're safe, that we're kind of keeping a perimeter. It may be making sure that someone stays off a busy highway if we're by the highway, stays out of the street. So what can we do to make that scene a little bit safer for someone who just can't navigate all the sensory changes? We ourselves should stay calm, right? If we're calm, we can help project a calm demeanor, help calm things down, talk in a calming voice. And I like to say, think about your sensory output. So I have here, limit your sensory input, or limit the sensory inputs that they're taking in. So what is your sensory output? If I'm a first responder, is my uniform odd to the touch? Is that rubbing up against the patient? Is my radio loud? Do I have my sirens on? How many people are on this scene and how many people are necessary? So really think about, as firefighters, as EMTs on a rig, like we kind of travel in pairs, right? In little packs. So that's a lot for someone to take in all of that information at once. So can we have just one person contacting someone who's a little more sensitive? And again, can we keep those verbal commands to a minimum, more simplified, so that we can kind of mitigate this chance of sending someone into a meltdown, into a behavioral situation, which can be very dangerous. So here's our stages of a meltdown. We saw that boy go through some of these stages. So there's calm, there's the triggers, right? And it's important to know what he does when he's triggered, right? What is our patient doing when they're triggered? My daughter will clench her fist, she'll yell, she'll grunt. Those are pretty common for her when she gets agitated. My son is more, withdrawn with his responses. So there will be kind of the rubbing of the head, or the kind of clenching of the jaw, the tightening of the muscles, the body. So what are we seeing? What is agitating? And when we get to that stage of agitation, can we back off a little bit? We heard, I believe it was Isaac, talking about talking someone down for hours. And my daughter with a sustained meltdown can last an hour for a meltdown. And that's a long time to wait. Sometimes we have that and sometimes we just don't. And like I said, this isn't meant to replace your practices in place. If there isn't, a real true medical emergency going on, a real true event that you need to get someone out of there. These are things that we can do if we have the time to wait and help somebody out, which will greatly increase their chances of being successful through this event. So we see that kind of that calm, that agitation, the peak. You're not going to get through to someone in the peak. When my daughter's in her peak, there's yelling, there's a lot of, crying, upset, there's destructive behavior. This is when she's going to hit me or lash out if she's going to do it. This is when she's going to throw something. So I like to say, if you're in that, if you've reached that, you're done talking. You need to get back. You need to observe. You need to make sure the patient's safe, make sure your people around you are safe, that you're safe. And wait that out. If you have someone with you, a caretaker, a parent, they might know best what's going to help them calm down. And I like to ask compliance questions of my daughter, something I know that she will say yes to. Our latest example of a meltdown in an unexpected situation was running out of vanilla soft serve ice cream while we were on a cruise. It was billed as unlimited soft serve ice cream. Clearly there was a limit because they ran out. And that was an unexpected situation. She had already, been a long day, had been in the pool, her scales were tipped. And there we go. We're in a meltdown, right? And a meltdown is a loss of all behavioral control. It's not a meltdown to get something. It's not a goal-oriented meltdown to get something. She's already past that point where I can't even offer anything else in place of this ice cream, because that's not what she's seeking. She has a loss of her behavioral control. And so I wait. I might ask a compliance question, ask somebody, it's an answer I know that they're going to say yes to, or something that I know they'll agree to. And then you'll see that the de-escalation, post-crisis depletion and recovery, it's not unlike having a seizure. So you're going to see someone use up a lot of energy when they go through a meltdown. And there might be some depletion on the way out. So there's going to be some recovery needed from that. So it's a tricky situation if you get into, and this is what we're trying to mitigate, is this meltdown with our awareness of their sensory health and their sensory sensitivities. We're going to talk a little bit about stimming, what that looks like and what it could look like when someone reaches that meltdown stage and they need to stim to calm themselves down. We saw it in the video with the little boy. His stimming included his counting on his hand to help calm himself down. So that was his stim, his deep breaths. So hand flapping is very common, rocking, grunting, or yelling. And these can be for different reasons. People stim for different reasons. It's thought to be a self-regulating behavior, something that helps someone regulate back to their baseline, back to their typically developed or their typical behavior. So self-regulation, fear, anxiety. I'm going to warn you guys, this next video starts out pretty loud and it might be triggering for someone out there watching who is on the spectrum. So this is someone who's going through some pretty serious stimming, but it's different than, someone fully acting out of a meltdown. This is probably someone who's been in a meltdown, but if you see the person filming this is getting pretty close to him, they're not taking any protective steps. We're not afraid of, the smashing of the TV here. So this is really what I would qualify as a stim, really to calm himself down. So this boy is in the middle of an event and it is going to be loud. So just bear with me, but this is what stimming can look like. So what we see here is some hand flapping, some snapping, some pacing. and some grunting. So what he's trying to do is get rid of some of that energy, calm himself down, get himself back to a baseline, a place where he's comfortable, where he can regulate himself. I don't know this specific individual. I don't know his level of function, what his baseline looks like, but I'm assuming this is not his baseline, that something has upset him, something has put him into this state to be this agitated. But I wouldn't classify this as a meltdown per se. This could be how he deals with his anxiety, his fear, his overload. So it can be very loud, very startling. Imagine if you were just in a grocery store and you saw someone do that, that would startle you. So as responders, as community members, it's great to be aware that that's what it could look like, and offer people help. What would I say to the mom in the mall, or to the parent or caretaker dealing with this person? I would simply say, as a bystander, like, do you need help? Do you need assistance? What can I do for you? Because someone's going to know what they need, what their kid needs. I need space, I need time, or I need nothing. I've been dragged out of Whole Foods by my hair by my daughter, and had some very well-meaning people, offer assistance. And I said, you know what, we're in the place where she might hurt more people. So I'm just going to, thank them kindly and, deal with what I have to deal with. But this is something that we can see in an emergency. This is someone we might have to evacuate. And this is someone we might have to wait to calm down, or get assistance. Like I said, many of you folks don't go hands-on. This isn't, that kind of training, but to be aware that these issues can arise, that this is what it could look like when someone's having an event or stimming to calm themselves down. So these sensory overloads can lead to bolting and wandering. And why do people bolt? Why do people wander? The thought is that it's, response to their outside environment. They're frustrated, they're confused, anxiety, fear, sensory overload. And so there's that bolt. And a bolt is different than a wander. A bolt is now it's an action, it's a runaway. That little boy was trying to bolt out of the mall because he was just overwhelmed. A wander can be someone just totally unaware of the, their environment, of where they are. They can wander as a stim, they can pace as a stim. My daughter will do that without any awareness as to where she is or where she's going. And we found out that she was a wanderer by, going into the back of the house for a minute or two, coming out, don't hear her, don't see her, and all of a sudden she's in the middle of the road with a car on either side of her. So it can happen very fast. I used to call her a ninja cat, because she was very fast and sneaky with her wandering, and just quiet, and all of a sudden gone. So it's something we want to be aware of, that they may be seeking a favorite spot. This may be something they've done before. They may be hiding or seeking water. And again, there is that tendency for drowning amongst autism, as there's a lack of safety awareness around the water. So that's another thing that can happen as a cause of these intense sensory events that are happening. So here are just some statistics on wandering and bolting, and when you're responding within your community, to be aware of. If you have someone with autism in your neighborhood or in your family, just know that this can happen, that this is a possibility. So you see some statistics there that are a cause for concern. You see 53% with those close calls with traffic. When I talked about keeping people out of the roads, keeping them safe, close calls with drowning, 53 go missing long enough to cause worry for their parents. So if you have this situation, if we're responding to it within the community during an event, during evacuation, here are some great questions to ask. Have they done this before? Have they run away before? In the parks, it happens that we, get people that get turned around, get lost. And we had a child with autism who was lost on the beach. His mother happened to mention that he had been watching the kites, that he really liked the kites. And sure enough, they found that child underneath a kite because that's where he had gone to. So what are they attracted to? What's in the area? What can we do to help find these folks if that's a part of your role in the community? And again, are they attracted to water? Because when we think about drowning, it can be anywhere. It can be a neighbor's pool. It can be a creek. It can be a lake. It can be a small amount of water if we're talking about a small child, but just to know that that exists. And do they have any sensory sensitivities? Do they have any fixations? There was a great story out of Los Angeles a few months ago with a young man who went missing. They never said he was on the spectrum, but he did have a fixation with rocks. And they found him because he was clicking the rocks together, which I thought was a really great story. So pay attention to those nuances. If you have someone, a family member, a community member who knows the person, who knows what they like, what they're fixated on, anything that can help us get these folks to safety. So I know how much you all love more acronyms, and we all have room for more in our brain, right? So just a little acronym to help you remember when you are dealing with someone in an emergency situation, and they might have some differences, whether that's autism, Down syndrome, Tourette's, Alzheimer's. These are good tips for anyone who's experiencing a difference, who might need a little extra care. So again, speaking slowly in that, very simple language. Don't talk to them if they're nonverbal. Don't not talk to them because you don't think they understand. Many of them understand you just fine. They just don't have the means to communicate back. Overload, reduce their sensory environment. I talked about being very aware of your own sensory output. What are you putting out there? What is this person faced with? What can you do to help? Locate someone familiar, right? Family member, caretaker, someone who knows that person well and who knows what might be their triggers. Explain what you're doing. I talked about doing first, then. Very helpful to break it down. I talked about my son in that baseball game, right? What was his expectation? What are we going to do? So explaining these steps, explain what the expectation is, explain what's going to happen next, and then support and reassure. We can always say, hey, you're doing great. Thanks for sticking with me. We can always give that reassurance to anybody. Do's and don'ts, right? And we've talked a lot about this. So there's that time to process, right? We watched that lady in the video talk about, hey, we need that time. We need that. It's already a situation where we're ramped
Did
up.
anyone
so
just see Stacy just say that in the chat? Stacy.
I'm looking into this. Hold on.
Yes, I see it.
I think we have a Zoom bomber or a Zoom scammer, or I don't know what they're called, but
Go ahead and continue the presentation. I'll take care of this.
Okay. Yeah, someone tried to take control of my screen earlier. Okay, so where were we? We were talking about sensory processing. If the scene is dangerous, I like to say keep one responder with that patient at all times. When I go somewhere with my children, if I'm with my parents, if I'm with another adult, I say, hey, I've got eyes on my daughter. Like, someone else needs to be responsible for all other things, because that is my only job, is keeping my eyes on her. If it's a dynamic scene, we want to make sure that person's safe. If we just went through a search and rescue and we just found somebody, how awful is that if we then lose track of them because they wander again? That doesn't look great. And our job is to help them and keep them safe. So do talk directly to the patient. Don't talk around them. Don't talk about them. Explain what you're doing. Allow that time to process. We talked about that praise and reassurance and your sensory output. Think about that. Think about how we respond for emergencies, and just think about the environment of an emergency. Think about an emergency shelter. If we just went through, you all know a little more about autism maybe than we started, or maybe you already knew, more than I know about autism. But if we take what we know about autism and someone experiencing an extreme event, what do our emergency shelters look like? I know to me, they all smell like a school cafeteria, right? There's that very specific smell to people sharing a shared space and cooking food in the same space and kind of living in that same space. What is that going to do to somebody that we're trying to keep safe, and we've just put them in a mass emergency shelter that's going to totally overwhelm them? You know, are we helping the situation? What can we do? Don't disrupt those stimming behaviors. So we saw that boy who was kind of grunting, who was yelling, and we don't want to stop that, because unless they're hurting us, hurting someone else, or it's something that, you know, our protocol demands that we step in on, we don't want to stop that. If they're pacing, if they're hand flapping, we want to allow that to continue, because that's going to help them calm down. That's going to help them regulate themselves. And that's really important. Also, don't assume that they don't understand you, right? Just because they're not talking to you doesn't mean they don't understand what's going on. So rapport, super, super important with autism. Gaining trust of folks. Sorry, guys, I have someone trying to get my screen control. Patrick, is there a Stacy Burns in here?
Yep.
Because that's who keeps requesting.
She's raising her hand.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. I don't think it's actually Stacy.
Okay.
The other name is David Horder.
All right, looks like David's gone now.
Okay. So establishing rapport with folks, trust, absolutely essential when we're talking about people on the spectrum. You think about routines, people they're familiar with. We're going to come in as strangers. We're going to come in as the unknown. So really requesting or really trying to get that rapport going is essential. If you can keep someone they trust with them, fantastic. I have a friend who has 2 children on the spectrum also. She was in Costco and her son experiences a medical event. He had a heart issue. He fainted, and now she's alone in Costco with first responders coming to help her son, and then still trying to manage her daughter with autism. So her son, she tried to explain to the EMTs, to the paramedics, to the firefighters, like, listen, he's just going to say yes to whatever you ask. He's not going to be able to explain what's going on. But they, because it's, an extreme medical emergency here dealing with his heart, need to take him to the hospital, and she can't leave the other child behind. So she can't get into the ambulance with him because she has another child with her. She needs to then follow the ambulance to the hospital. So what are the options in a situation like this? You can't keep that trusted care provider with you, but could you keep her on the phone? Could you FaceTime her? Could you do something? Is there a way to say, hey, yeah, we'll make room for your daughter in the ambulance? And I don't know the answer, and I'm not saying they did the wrong thing, but think outside the box. What can we do to really keep that trusted provider with them? Because that's going to be the key. That's going to help us out. If not, we're at a loss. A trusted person is great. Also a familiar item, right? If they can just hold on to that tablet. When my son had his appendix out, they wheeled him right into that operating room while he was still on his tablet. There was no need to try to take that away from him, because they could manage the situation and he was calm with it. So why not keep that with them? Or can you have an incentive at the end? If we're going somewhere, if it's an event, if it's something like an emergency, we have to go get medical care. Is there a treat always at the end of medical care? I give frozen yogurt to my kids, right? So can you ask a parent, a caregiver, hey, if this person follows through with our direction, what can we offer? What can we do? can they have this, or we keep this with us, or we have this teddy bear, we have this blanket. Can we offer an incentive? Will that help? And it might not. We're dealing with folks on all ends of the spectrum. So something to be mindful of. So that's what I have for you guys on my presentation. I really appreciate you all sticking with me and talking about it. Like I said, none of this presentation was meant to offend anybody. This is all my personal experience with autism, my kids, and folks that I have come across in my professional working environment. So I just like to get this information out to you all. So that you're maybe a little better informed about your community and just a little more prepared to help folks that might be experiencing something different. So at this point, I'll turn it back over to Patrick, and we can do, I'm open for any questions or comments anyone has at this point.
Okay, I think I got rid of the spoofer, and I locked the meeting so no one can rejoin. Sorry about that, guys. Thank you, Beth, for what a great presentation. A lot of people thanking you in the comments. There were some questions for sure. I did ask people to bring up those questions. So
I'm going to stop sharing, and then I'm going to just put my information in the chat for everyone.
Okay. And then we'll go ahead and ask people to raise their hand if they have a question. Joe, go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes, sorry. The spoofer's still here.
All right, well, it's not
Hey,
me.
before he talks, Patrick, sorry to jump in. If you can hear me, it's Captain Gross.
Yeah, I can
Hey,
hear
Beth,
you.
before you put your, oh, sorry about that.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. It should be okay. I think Patrick was able to get rid of the person.
No, the person's still here.
Okay. Continue.
Right, well, I appreciate you doing this presentation. And I work in mental health. I currently treat addicts and alcoholics. And a lot of the behaviors that you've talked about come out in my addicts and alcoholics. I mean, very similar type of behaviors, but they're not all. They're none of them are autistic, but the similar type of behaviors. And I appreciate you doing this. Very, very informative. Back before I worked with addicts and alcoholics, I worked for an autistic daycare center back when I was in college getting my degree in recreation. And now I work as a recreation therapist, treating multiple different people, currently addicts and alcoholics, but I worked for a while in mental health. And you are the bomb. Thank you. I appreciate it.
And thank you for doing, what you do. I think the more we all share from our personal experiences, I think the more educated our responder community is in general.
Will the slides be shared with us? Or if not, can you put the first slide back up again? I'd like to take a picture of that first one with the 5 bits of news.
I can share the PowerPoint. Patrick, if I give that to you, are you able to share it with the participants in this this chat, or my email's up there and I can email it to you? I can't do the video, the one specifically about the woman who's sharing her personal story. I don't want, she specifically
No,
wants
it wasn't
that.
the video. It wasn't the video. It was that 5 that you
The
had
5 points.
Yeah, you had 5 points. There was an overlay. So the last one I wasn't able to fully read, but whatever you could do, if you could share the PowerPoint, that would be great.
No, I have a PDF version of it without the videos, so I'm happy to share that around. And if you all, if you want to email me and request that, maybe that's the easiest way to go about it. And
Certainly.
I can certainly get that to you. And I think mentioned, oh, you're welcome. I mentioned early in the presentation, I do have a I do have a guide for folks who have children on the spectrum, who have dependents on the spectrum, but also high functioning folks on the spectrum, or anyone with a difference could use it. And it is a disaster preparedness guide. So talking to folks about disaster, what to do, what to prepare, what to pack. And it's just a little bit more specific than your typical Red Cross, this is what to pack. I go over sensory items and stuff to pack. So if anyone wants to email me and wants access to that, happy to do that as well.
Okay. I've had to disable the chat, and I've also disabled unmuting. So if anybody does have a question, they're going to have to go ahead and raise their hand, and then we'll call on them. Okay. A quick question about the video. Since this is being live streamed on YouTube, is that going to be a problem?
That's fine, because we talked about the context of it, so that's fine.
Okay, Carrie.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you for what you presented this evening. I recently was blessed to go through a class for the adults that are on the spectrum, and they recommended that it would happen to be an emergency response class. And they recommended that if you see somebody having one of those moments where they're either clapping, yelling, they said walk up not too close, but they said to actually introduce yourself and tell them, I'm here to help. And they said saying those words set a tone and a precedence. And they said to keep setting expectations. Do you find that to be helpful, or is that too broad? Is that too?
In my opinion, I think, yes, we want to tell everyone that we're here to help. And if you think about your typical emergency response, right? Hi, I'm Beth, I'm an EMT, I'm here to help you. Well, my partner already has 5 probes on you, right? So yeah, if someone's in the middle of that kind of stimming, you can certainly talk to them and present like, hey, I'm here to help. And with my daughter, I kind of talked to her in passing, like, hey, are you ready for dinner? What's going on? Because there's this, she's passing in and out of my view, my consciousness, my world, where she's going to engage with me. So yeah, absolutely. Talk to them and tell them why you're there, offer the help. It might not click for everybody, right? Everyone's response is going to be a little bit different, but as long as you're coming from a place of good intentions and you're, reading, is my presence further escalating this situation, or are we still pretty balanced? That would be my advice there.
Thank you.
Okay, Adam.
Beth, thank you for an amazing presentation.
You're welcome.
It's not easy to do. I've given many autism presentations, and yeah, you can't make everybody happy, but you did an excellent job. Thank you so much. I'm a special education teacher, so many years of working with students with autism. I've raised 2 boys with autism myself. My wife is on the autism spectrum. And in school, we, have to go through active shooter drills and a variety of other drills. I'm curious to know how often do you actually do any drilling with your own children as far as emergencies?
I do. We talk about a go bag. We talk about what to grab in an emergency. My daughter's idea of a go bag is 30 pounds of toys that she can't live without. So, is it all the essentials? No, not even close. But they know, they know that things will be different. They know where they're going to go in an emergency.
You actually run through a drill, like actually have them pack up and take it out and go through all that?
Yeah, because on any red flag day where I live, we pack the go bags and we have them by the door. And so when I started to do that, my daughter assumed that we were going to go to a hotel, because that's what bags packed means. It means, fun time at a hotel. So I thought, well, I need to introduce her to what this means. So we haven't done it yet this season, but yes, I have run through the drill of we're getting the essentials in the car. we're going to Grammy and Pause, or we're going somewhere else or somewhere else. In our first ever disaster, before I had, everything figured out, which I clearly do in life now, we packed up, and my husband took them to my parents' house, which was then evacuated later. I wasn't with them. I was working in the disaster at the time. And we never even fathomed that an event would be that big, since we live far enough away from my parents, that it would be impacting both places. So yeah, we definitely talk about, this is one place we'll go, and this is another place we might go. So giving those options and leaving it open to this might be the reality.
Have you ever scripted out the steps so that they understand kind of, we do this first, this next?
So in my in the disaster preparedness guide that I created, I do have a social story in there. This
Great.
is what's in my bag. This is where my bag is kept. I'm going to be with my family. This is where we might go. We might go somewhere else. And it's a very simple, so parents can fill in their own, what could happen next. But yeah, absolutely, going into all the steps.
And do you recommend taking children to, say, the fire department, to go check out the vehicles, to kind of get a sense of who responders might be?
Yeah.
To get them
Absolutely.
familiar with them.
Mm-hmm. And I tell my daughter, every time we see firefighters or police officers, I just take that as an opportunity to talk about why they're there and what they're doing. Any exposure, I think, is great. Of course, it depends on the person's level of function and their comfort. But I think the more you can expose someone to these novel situations, then the better.
I also, just to pass along a piece of advice, having written so many IEPs, so just especially for younger children and teenagers who are still in K through 12, you can, if you do have a child on the spectrum, you can have the case manager write a plan into the IEP for these contingencies. And please do. Please make sure to push your child's case manager to have a step-by-step plan that the general ed teacher can follow in any emergency.
That's great advice. Thank you for sharing.
So, thank you very much for your time, and I don't want to
Chris.
pick up any more of it. Plenty of other hands up. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Cynthia.
Yes, I have a granddaughter who's severely autistic. My son just retired from the Air Force in Japan, so she speaks Japanese a little bit, but not very much English. And he speaks some Japanese. His wife's a Japanese speaker and citizen. And they came over to visit on the plane. And I imagine that was quite an experience for her. The other granddaughter is a twin, who not autistic at all. And the mother wanted to take them to Disneyland, which was a terrible experience for the autistic child. We took them to Knott's Berry Farm, and she insisted on going into a very busy restaurant. And I wanted to go somewhere else, since just, pick up something and take it back to the motel. That was before COVID. And what I'm trying to get to is that when we took her away from the restaurant, instead of waiting there, into a place where there was a lot of stuffed toys, she was very attracted to the stuffed toys, and that seemed to calm her down, like the Snoopy toy. And she was completely different after that with the Snoopy toy. So of course we bought her the Snoopy toy. But I was wondering, are there certain sensory things like that, a stuffed toy that will calm a child down when they're going through these meltdowns? And so taking from one bad sensory experience, just one good sensory experience?
Sure. And maybe that's something you keep in your toolkit next time you have your granddaughter. Maybe you keep a surprise stuffed animal or 5 in the closet just in case, right? So you know that that's something that attracts her and calms her down. So if you're going into a situation like her experience, probably in every other restaurant, is I go in, I sit down, I eat. Now I go in and now I leave, and now what's going on? So yeah, a lot of people on the spectrum, children especially, will have some kind of fixation or item that they love. My daughter loves small Lego bits, Pokemon toys, stuffed animals, and she always gets a stuffed animal when we go somewhere like an aquarium, and so they have a gift shop. So we went to a Giants game, and she wanted a stuffed animal from the gift shop, right? She thought it was the same thing. And there was no way I was leaving without paying $30 for a llama that has nothing to do with the Giants, but it's what she had in mind and what she expected. So knowing those things is great. And for you, what a great tool for you to have, right? And if I were a parent of that child, I would have a surprise stuffed animal in my my go box, so that in that unexpected event, I can bring that up. So super helpful to know what the comfort items are.
Okay, I just was wondering, is there a way to stop meltdown with another sensory helpmate?
Yeah. So if you know what helps calm them down, weighted blankets. I have headphones for my daughter, so if something gets too loud and she's starting to agitate, I block out that sensory feeling. And yeah, she does love to cuddle a stuffed animal, so that might be something sensory and comforting to her and to your granddaughter. So it's all about knowing, because one size isn't going to fit all on the spectrum. So it's all about knowing that individual. That's why a caretaker or a parent is so impactful, because absolutely, you could solve a sensory meltdown with a smell. Some people carry around scented sprays that will help calm someone down, because a certain smell will bring a child back. Clearly, bacon isn't a smell that my son can handle, so I would never, carry a bacon scented anything. But it can work the other way too, where that scent can be something that calms you down.
Or having a parent. I'm a teacher, so before COVID, I was teaching music in my house, my studio, and there was I had an autistic student, and the mother knew how to handle him, which made it much easier for me to teach him. He ended up being so enamored with music and playing the piano, he didn't want to stop. I mean, that was his calming experience, and he ended up being one of my best students, actually, on the piano.
That's fantastic. That's great that they found something that he really connects with. I think that's key.
Okay, thank you. Thank you
All
for
right.
presenting.
Thank you.
Mitch.
Okay. Hi, Beth. Thank you very much. The overview and identifiers in your presentation, very enlightening. I got a tremendous amount out of this. Where I'm coming from immediately, and most from want to take away from this presentation is, as a first responder, or as a CERT responder, and I volunteer as a patrol officer for LAPD. We come on a scene, an emergency scene, and we have bodies, we have a lot of activity. What are your go-to points to help identify? Am I addressing somebody that is just being a perp, somebody that is just a bad guy, or somebody that identify as special needs or artistic and is having a meltdown? What are the go-to identifiers in that? We got moments to decide.
You really do. And I'm probably a little more in tune to oh, that's autism, right? Because I live it, right? I have it in my environment all the time, but I get it. How do I know if that person is drunk on drugs or has a difference?
Yeah.
And one of the things I talked about were some of those identifiers, right? Like the hand flapping, the refusal to look in the eye. Now, you know that refusal to look in the eye can just be a perp, a dirtbag, right? Like they don't want to look at us, but it could also be someone with a sensory sensitivity. So what else are they doing? Are they clutching something that seems a little odd for their age? Like, are they a grown adult with a Pokemon toy? Are they squeezing something? Are they repeating something that doesn't sound like, your rant from someone who might be having, who might be chronically without shelter and having, an episode on the street, but might be repeating something that sounds like a Disney movie, a movie. What can we take away? And you're right, you only have seconds, and it might be that you have to go all hands on with someone who is not ready for hands on, and that might trigger them. So the best you can, try to pick up on those nuances. And I would suggest watching some videos online, honestly, like the woman who was talking, because with my son, if you see him, you think, well, that's kind of a weird kid, and then you get to know him and you're like, got it. I understand what's going on now, but to the untrained eye, just kind of a different kiddo. So understanding those nuances and all the pieces, is there weird communication going on? Are they answering my question in a weird way? Not on a, I'm drunk and I'm slurring my words way, but, do they have some inappropriate responses? Are their behaviors a little inappropriate for their age? Are there some of those, hand flapping, pacing, grunting kind of very stereotypical movements that we see going on?
Gotcha. And as far as CERT and NTP, this was fabulous information. We set up our staging area, we set up our comfort zone, our comfort area, and to train those people that have volunteered to run the comfort. They all need to hear what you just said tonight, and I'll make sure of it. I mean, it was fabulous because, yeah, we get over the emergency and we set up that comfort zone. Yeah, we might have some people in there that need special attention, special care, and handling. So this was just very helpful tonight. Thank you.
And, I know I talked specifically about autism, but as you set up those comfort zones, do you have someone with Alzheimer's who won't remember the directions you just gave them?
Right.
There's so many pieces to it, and we can't be experts in everything, right? But we can kind of be attuned to someone who needs a little more supervision, a little more safety, a little more containment.
And every once in a while, a weighted blanket doesn't hurt me either. So there you go.
Oh, I know it. They are pretty cozy.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Gary.
Hi, Beth, and the CERT organizers for this. I just want to say thank you very much. This has been very informative. As a parent of a now adult child with autism, I think you've taught me something, and in the very least, you have reminded me of a lot of things that probably over time I've forgotten. I just wanted to bring up something, and I don't mean to talk down to anybody. I think this is probably something that everybody has thought of themselves. But it's just kind of one of those things that people don't want to talk about. You very rightly, I think, approach this kind of from a acute care area where you're kind of one-on-one with somebody with autism or some other kind of disability, and you're helping them. In my CERT training, and I think most other people's, it's very similar. We kind of get more involved on a not exclusively, obviously, but more involved on a big event, mass casualty events. For earthquakes and tornadoes and floods and things like that. That's kind of where my training has come in. And our mandate in CERT is to do the most good for the most people. And when you brought up the issue of people not cooperating, and this could go for anybody, not just people on the autism spectrum, obviously. But if somebody isn't cooperating and you have the need to evacuate a group of people, I think psychologically we just need to be prepared for the possibility that we might have to abandon somebody who isn't cooperating in order to get people out of harm's way. At least, temporarily, we can say we're going to go back and try to solve this other issue. But it's like, if I can lead 25 people out of harm's way and one person is slowing things down, we might have to leave them behind and move on with the group and then come back and try to solve the problem. It's just a psychological thing that I think everybody's thought of. We don't want to talk about it, but we have to be prepared for that kind of thing too.
Right. No, and you're right. That is uncomfortable to bring up because none of us want to be that person that leaves anyone behind. So what I would say in that situation is, right, when I started this talk, like nothing trumps your policies and your procedures that you're trained to do. So if you're trained to do the most good, you come upon someone with autism, you can't move them. Like there are a couple quick things we can do, right? Is there a parent or caretaker? What can we do to get this person out of here? This is what we need to do. And then, I don't know your policies. I haven't participated in CERT. I'm pretty familiar with the, civilian aspect of it. So can you call into the authority? Can you let the sheriff's department know, hey, we are unable to assist this person. This person needs a little extra care. So there are steps that we can do without feeling like we have totally abandoned somebody, because we haven't, right? You are trying to do your bit. You are trying to do the most good, but you're right. You don't have an hour to wait for that meltdown to calm down. And as civilians, I'm making the assumption that you don't comfortably go hands-on, nor should you with someone that you think is presenting with a difficulty like this. That would be something that I would do my darndest to, tell a parent, tell a caregiver, tell someone even vaguely familiar, do whatever you can to get this person out of here. And, maybe we have the time to, when we're caring for them, we have more time to help mitigate some of those problems.
I think that was Gary, right? Just asked that question.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, Crystal.
Hi. Hi, Beth. Thank you so much for the presentation. I'm like you, I'm a parent of a 9-year-old child, a son that is autistic, and I will be emailing you later for
Please
specifics. Yeah. So before the chat was disabled, a lot of people were asking for different resources, and I just wanted to offer one that has been probably the most helpful resource on autism that I have encountered. My son was diagnosed at 2. He is now 9. It's a Facebook group, so obviously you would have to join if you're not a member, but it's a group called Autism Inclusivity. And it's a private group, so you would have to answer like 3 questions before you're able to join. And the whole point of it is it's led by autistic adults. And they talk about everything. Just to be clear, I am not autistic myself. But parents like myself, other people that work around autism, variety of different things are encouraged to join. However, there are some set rules, and one of them is you're not allowed to talk over anyone that is an autistic person. It's our opportunity to learn whatever topics are being discussed, or if there are questions, specific questions that I would have as a parent. And it's just been, I wish I found it. It's yeah, it's my Bible, so to speak. But that's just one resource, and I wanted to put that out there because there were, I think, like 5 questions about resources and such.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And I hadn't heard of that group, so thank you. I will check them out. In my kind of research, trying to find resources to share with you all, there is the Big Red Safety Toolbox, and that is a resource put together by an autism group that really talks about on the parent end what can be done to prepare children, and then on the responder end, what kind of questions can we ask. It does a lot with search and rescue. So when we have that time, what questions can we ask? And then another really great one for you folks is the Sirens of Silence through it's LA County Fire Department has a web page, and it has some really helpful tools like pictures of emergencies and a different way to communicate with folks on the spectrum during emergencies in picture form if they're nonverbal, and it has it in different languages too, which is incredibly useful. So if you all have a chance to check that out, really relevant to what we talked about tonight.
Were those put together by autistic people themselves?
I don't know. It was a program that the fire department did when I went through my master's program. One of my classmates was with the fire department and shared it with me. So I don't know the story behind it. I just know that it's a pretty awesome resource.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your resource.
And Carol.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank you for this presentation. I think it's been very helpful. It really saddens me. I've been in roles where this isn't disaster experience, but teaching, or I'm in healthcare as a dental hygienist where I haven't been told, and I've had suspected people that may have been on the spectrum, that it helps so much if you're told, and it just really saddens me that people feel it can't be open about it. And I wish in general, people would feel more comfortable sharing. So I think we could be more helpful and inclusive.
Yeah, and it's funny how many times I'll say autism in public and some people get really shocked. Like, you just called your kids autistic or told me about their very personal experience. And to me, I know that I'm sharing it to help them and to help others understand them. But there is a lot of stigma around the diagnosis. I know when my son was first diagnosed, they said he'll probably be normal by 5. And so that's the thought I clung to, like, well, I'm not going to tell you he has autism because he's going to be normal by 5, and that was kind of the stigma then too. And we're talking only 9 years ago. So we really have to respect where everyone is. I would never on scene or while helping someone ask if they had autism. What I like to ask, because I know people are at different levels of accepting it or, sharing about their experience, is I like to say, is this behavior typical? Is there something I can do to help with this situation? So those are both really benign phrases that can, help anyone, but I find them pretty helpful if I find that someone's not at that place where they can share.
And James.
Hi, Beth. I'm both CERT and Red Cross, and most of the time when we're doing our map our neighborhoods is when we would communicate with caregivers who are responsible for autistic kids or adults. And one of the things that does happen, because this is on Gary's point about we tend to be disaster response style things. And my question before, and still kind of in terms of, if we were to encounter your son because you're the victim, you're non-responsive, we've got you onto the right tarp and we're trying to care for you, but your son is elevated because of that. What is your feeling as the mother, the best way we can help that situation? Is he at the level where he can understand when we're saying we're trying to help your mom and, you know?
Sure. My son, yes. My daughter, no. So it would depend on who's with me, on, you know, what else is going on. How much do they see of my injury? You know, do I have open wounds and they're just freaking out? So my son's probably going to have a lot of anxiety around that.
Right.
So the same thing, you know, explaining, talking, that Sirens of Silence that I mentioned has great pictures to just show like, hey, mom needs a hospital, like in that, and we're taking mom
Okay.
like to get help. So and not lying, right?
Right.
We're not
right.
going to say mom's okay, mom's taking a nap. We're going to tell them what's going on in very simple language. Mom needs to go to the doctor. Doctor is something pretty universal that people understand. So mom is hurt. Mom needs a doctor. We're here to help. You know, all these kind of very common language, you know, and it depends on how someone is going to react to that or respond to that or be able to take that in. But I would absolutely start there and explain.
I remember in the chat, one of the parents had mentioned that they put a special care card with their kids that indicates points to that. Is there, I don't know if it's a stimulation issue, but would they have any kind of medical alert or things that we can look for?
Yeah, if they'll keep it on. I do have a medical alert bracelet for my daughter that she refuses to wear with my information and her diagnosis. So it's hard because there's that sensory piece. So it's hard to keep something like that on them. But I've seen stickers for cards, or, you know, some kind of thing that you can write in their clothing, or temporary tattoos if you're going out somewhere. With your information, if it's like an event or I'm going to Disneyland, I can put this temporary tattoo on my kid that tells you a little bit about them. So there's different things, but it'll depend on, you know, a parent's and caregivers' desire to share that, and where they're at with accepting it and what the child will tolerate.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
There was an interesting point you brought up in the previous training that you gave about if you have a home with an autistic child or autistic person in it, there's a question about having a sign that says so, and that opens up to some very serious privacy concerns. So it's something to think about, that if you're on a disaster response team and you're checking homes, you may encounter someone who is autistic, and then what? And not know it.
Yeah, and you know, there are certain states that'll do a registry, but that is also seen as a privacy measure. So what are those little clues that we talked about, that, you know, some of those stereotypical behaviors that could clue you in? If there's no sign saying autism lives here, you know, what can we do? What can we pick up on?
Oh, yeah.
Hi. I just had a quick question. I'm a mother of a special needs child as well. He's nonverbal. He's 12 and he has a neurodevelopmental rare disorder. I guess my question to you, I arrived late to the session tonight. Would you be offering another workshop like this in the near future? Or do you, can you hear me? Sorry.
Yeah, they did film it. So I think you can go back. I think it's being recorded. So I think it's going to be posted, and hopefully Patrick can share with you all where to find that information if you're not familiar. I do these for different organizations, you know, upon request, and my information is there in the chat if you want to email me or had any specific questions. I'm always happy to, it looks like Patrick just posted it. Always happy to talk with someone or to give them extra information.
Come here. Yeah, I'm sorry. I have another question.
That's okay. Sure.
So hi, I'm the dad of Zaya, is our son. I wanted to ask you if you have come across any incidents at the airport, and what is that best solution that you have come across to deal with a meltdown or a sensory reaction?
So when I took my daughter on a plane, which was only recently, we tried her first plane ride at 12. What I did is I did a sensory story or a social story for her that her school wrote for her, helped me. She has AIDS and helped me write this story, what to expect. And then at the airport for parents with children who need special needs, TSA Assist is fantastic. And so what you do is you tell them ahead of time, you fill out a form or you talk to someone, and they actually walked us through the process, didn't make her go through the metal detector. They did the wand on her. She didn't have to take off her shoes. So there's steps you can do ahead of time as a parent. If you're already there, right? That's my greatest fear, being on that airplane and then being on the federal no-fly list the next day because my child had that extreme meltdown in the air. So what I did is I made little treat packets for the flight attendants and the people that I sat around with a little card saying, this is what's going on. This is what it looks like when she's trying to calm herself down. Because we've seen a lot of stories where that hasn't been the case, where people haven't been tolerated. So same thing, giving space, mitigating those sensory sensitivities, right? With my daughter, it's the headphones, it's having a tablet, it's having something else, it's having familiar snacks. But also on the other end, on the parent's end, really preparing that child ahead of time for the changes that are going to come.
Support.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
As far as support from the airport besides TSA or in the plane from the people that actually work there rather than the people around you? Because he doesn't understand.
Yeah, he's more in the severe
So he's in the
spectrum.
severe
He's not-
spectrum.
Yeah, he's not high functioning.
So
Yeah.
it's kind of like we're trying to find a support that will mitigate that situation in case he's having a meltdown or he does not understand where he's at and he just want to get out. You're on the air. There's actually nothing you can do. But if the staff in the plane are not familiar with any of the situation, that there's no help. And I was just wondering if you let the airline know, or how do you go about it?
I mean, absolutely. As a parent, I do. I give everyone as much information as I can ahead of time to try to help my kids. This is what it looks like when they're having a hard time. This is what it looks like when they're trying to calm down. These are things that can help me, and really explaining that up front. Plus, I would just say, I would call the airline ahead of time and see what their protocols are, what you can do, and what steps you can take to help them understand your child.
All right, great. Thank you very much for all the information. It is
Adam
great.
might have something to add to that. Patrick, can you unmute Adam?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hopefully you live in the Los Angeles area, I'm hoping. There is a shooting location for most TV shows when they have scenes within an airplane. A lot of those are done at a place called Air Hollywood in Pacoima. And Air Hollywood has an Open Sky for Autism session where they help families of children with autism get used to airplanes, get used to air travel. So it's a specific program for that. It's airhollywood.com.
Thank you
just
for
wanted to pass
sharing
that
that.
along.
Perfect.
That's great. Thanks. We are after 9 o'clock, so I would like to thank everybody for attending. We'll stay on if Beth is interested in staying on to answer some more questions, but I do want to thank everybody who attended. And could I get a round of applause for Beth? And
Thank you.
like I said, we'll stay on for a little bit longer so we can answer some more questions.
Thank you, everybody.
Linda. Linda, you're muted. You should be able to go and hit the unmute button. Should be popping up asking you to unmute.
Got it. All right, we got it. Hi, I'm Linda.
Hi.
Thank you. I mean, I can relate to most everything that you are saying. I have a 33-year-old adult daughter on the spectrum, and we've been through many, many, many challenges. We've been in airports. We've had the police come to our house. We've had just many, many different things. But I want to say the most important thing that we have ever done is this program called Relationship Development Intervention. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it's on the Autism Speaks website. And I'm just going to read a bit. Relationship Development Intervention is a family-based behavioral treatment which addresses the core symptoms of autism. It focuses on building social and emotional skills. Parents are trained in the primary therapists in most RDI programs. But it goes on and on. You can look it up and read it for yourself. And we were lucky. We did this for 10 years. And we were very, very fortunate to have the most brilliant teacher in this, Janet Bowden. She's not with us anymore. But anyway, that's what I have to offer if anyone's looking for information that's very important.
Thank you for sharing that. I'd never heard it before, and I'm definitely going to check it out.
You have, oh, Wendy, you will put it in your next presentation. I guarantee it.
Thank you.
There was somebody putting in the chat something about something negative about Autism Speaks. Is there going on with that, Beth?
No, I think it's personal preference and what they focus on. They're very science focused. So it just depends on how people feel about that organization. They do some great work, but they are very research focused.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? Carol.
I was just going to say, in regards to air travel, I was just on my first plane trip from the pandemic, and I believe it was in Sacramento Airport. There was a room in a place that they had that was for low stimulation. So I think if you're traveling, that you might want to check out to see if your airports you're traveling through have something like that.
Yeah, thank you. A lot of ballparks are doing it too with sensory sensitivity rooms and different sporting events. So it is catching on, which is nice.
All right. If there's no other questions, then thank you everybody for attending. Oh, Monique.
Oops.
Hello?
Okay.
There you go.
Hi. Hi. I had a question. I have an 18-year-old. He just turned 18, and he's on the autism spectrum. How do you teach a child, an adult now, I guess safety, but how do you I can't even explain it because I don't even know how to explain it myself. Just how do you get them to understand, I guess, safety? Like I always question, like I ask them, can you call 911? But he doesn't, he has a lot of echolalia, so he'll just repeat what I say. But I figured by me saying, can you call 911, just to see what he does, he'll just stand there and repeat it. So if something, I question if, how do you teach someone like that, grab the phone, dial 911. I try to test them right now. I gave him the phone and I said, call the police, please. He's just not understanding it. And then I asked, can you dial 911? He just put 91. I think he missed the other one, of course, but it's like, how do you help him? How do you teach him? Because what if there is a situation where, I don't know, in the future I fall or something, and I need him to call and I'm on the floor like, call 911. How do I get him to understand that?
Yeah, so that's a hard one, and it's going to be very specific to your situation. You know, it's hard for me not knowing him, but my question to you is, and not to freak you out, right? Because that's what life with autism, raising a child can be like a series of long what ifs. If you get him to dial 911, then what? You know, does he understand to talk to the person on the other end? Is he going to be able to communicate information? So what other, you know, tools can you use? There's a lot of apps out there specifically that will let police know that you have, you know, someone with different needs in your household. I think Safety 911 is the name of it. I haven't looked into them or used some myself, but you can look at these apps and then they'll understand that you have someone in your house with a special need, and maybe that's your mitigation for it. Maybe it's not appropriate and your child won't be able to dial 911. I know my daughter, that won't be an option for her. So it's working with her behavior team to see, well, what can I do? Can I have her at least be safe while I'm trying to get help?
So, and I have one more question. I'm sorry,
Sure.
if you don't mind.
That's okay.
So I heard how, you know, you had mentioned you had the bracelet. I had thought, now that he's older, I had thought about like putting, you know, something with his name on it, having him wear like a little, the little necklace with the little badge or something. But then I hold back because then I worry, you know, not to be so negative, but there's like a lot of, you know, there's kidnappers, and I just scared because if I have something with his name on it, anybody could say his name is Jaden. Anybody could, kidnapper could be like, hey, Jaden, he just knows his name is Jaden and he'll just go. And it's like, how do I prevent that from happening? And I could be getting way ahead of myself, you know, but just, it's those little things that I try to like, I think about doing because I want the community to know who he is, but then it's those little scenarios that pop into my head. I'm like, well, I don't, you know, what if someone just calls him, he doesn't know right from wrong? And it's like, how do you prevent that? Or how do you go about that to make it clear? Because I wonder sometimes if, you know, I never had it, but if he was to wander off and they were to ask his name, he understands how to say his name. But if he says if you were to ask who's his mom, he could say who I am, but it's you're going to ask him about 20 times before he, you know, he says my name. So it's just little things like that. I try to, how do I go about trying to help him at least so he's safe in case he was to get lost somehow? Someone's able to tell him something and he could answer back, especially when they're nonverbal.
Yeah, so I would think about what is the likelihood that he's going to be on his own without you? What is the likelihood that he's going to need that information? You know, how much time is he unsupervised? And then really, when we look at statistics, what is the likelihood of stranger kidnapping, right? Is it someone we know usually? Yeah. I take great faith in knowing that my daughter is just a little terrible. I'm not sure who would want her. You know, she's hard to deal with. So that gives me a little bit of comfort. Your son at 18 might not really be a great target for someone. Yeah, someone can be a creeper, can be, you know, an abuser, and that's hard as a mom. But I think about the science, the actual facts, right? So I would say put that medical bracelet on them, because there's a lot of folks that have them that have different conditions. And, you know, I think the abuse in my perspective would be worth the risk, right? That low instance that a creeper is going to single him out, get that information off of his bracelet necklace and use that to harm him, I think is a lot lower than him wandering off and not being without you and someone needing to know who he is. And that's just my very mom perspective, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, that does. And I appreciate you sharing that with me. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. You take care.
Thank you too.
Thanks.
This was an interesting presentation because when I requested this, I expected it was going to be people who are not used to or who do not have children with autism, or not on the spectrum themselves, or not don't have family members with autism, as more recognition and understanding how to handle it. But clearly, I think almost all the questions came from people who have children with autism. So I found that very interesting, and I'm glad there were so many people who were able to join us who have children with autism or are autistic themselves and are able to ask questions, and hopefully everyone found some useful answers out of this, and found this presentation useful. But definitely thank you everybody for coming. Thank you, Beth, for giving such a great presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invite and for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to folks.
All right. Have a good night, everybody.
Okay. Good night.
And like I said, this will be up on our YouTube channel, and if you want to rewatch it. And it's up there now. So have a good night, everyone. Thank you, Beth.
Night.
Oh, for those who are wondering, Carolyn will give her presentation at a later date. We'll go ahead and give her the time that she deserves for that presentation.